Good evening, councillors, also members of the staff, the general public streaming at home, and also our gallery this evening as well. Thank you for joining us. We acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and also emerging, and also to those from other communities who may be with us today, for they hold the memories, the tradition and the culture of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Item 3, the apologies and leaves of absence. Any requests? I know, welcome back Councillor Bennett after a substantial few months off, and we understand all's going well. Item 4, declaration under the Acts, regulations, codes or local laws. CEO, are there any declarations? No, thank you. Item 5, declarations by councillors of any conflict of interest this evening. Not aware of any, thank you very much, councillors. Item 6, confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting. Do we have somebody to move that they are correct from the 19th of July? Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hall. Do you wish to speak against? No, carried unanimously. Item 7, there are no delegates' reports. On to item 8.1, the draft closed circuit television policy. This is to be placed on public exhibition. There's a recommendation on page 8 of your report, councillors. Is anyone happy to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer, as per the recommendation. Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll take that off to speak if that's all right. Yep. Yeah, the policy addresses the various fixed CCTV cameras that we have on our assets around town, whilst dealing with all the legislative requirements such as the Privacy Act, the Silence Devices Act and then some. So I think it protects our council assets well, and the rights of privacy as well of our community members at the same time, in that the policy that's recommended here definitely is quite tight. It restricts access for lawful purposes and in cooperation with those other government organisations and non-government organisations if required. So in my view, I think it's quite a tight, solid policy that we can build on if we need to in the future, depending on what other assets we get or how we move in the future. So I'll support the recommendation as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett? No. Councillors? Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Fundamentally, I think I agree with Councillor Simpfendorfer. I was sort of thinking that I'd move a slightly different motion, only because it's semantics and I'm averse to endorsing something to put it out for public notice and then having to come back and potentially unendorse what we've endorsed. I think it's a bit silly, but anyway. The only concern I have, I accept that the policy puts in place all of the things that Councillor Simpfendorfer said in regard to public safety, privacy, etc. The only thing that worries me a little bit is there is no requirement for the elected councillors to be making decisions about where and how and when we might install these cameras under this policy. My interpretation of this is it's silent on the issue, which would essentially mean that if the policy is being applied, then the decision could be made by staff as a delegated activity. And I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. I think CCTV is something that I think the elected councillors should be making decisions about. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions or clarifications. There's like around 4.8 of the policy document, which states, at no time will the CCTV system be used for monitoring workplace performance. So could that be used to assess whether staff members have breached a workplace code of conduct or their employment agreement? No. No. Oh, sorry, do I turn that on?
No, that's not what it's intended for. As was, I think, mentioned by Councillor Simpfendorfer, the main aim of this policy is to protect council assets, but also protect staff in terms of health and safety and protection in terms of interactions with the public. Thanks.
Just that it, as with what Councillor Mildren just mentioned, that it's delegated as to where the cameras will, or video cameras will go. So it says here, I know it's got here 4.4 personal information and privacy collected will be handled in accordance to the Information Privacy Act. So staff will be aware. Obviously there's going to be signs, or people. Is that the case where these cameras will go in the council building? Like, just so we have it. Will we have it in a meeting room or?
Councillor Hall, the signs will be up to alert the public about where those CCTV cameras are. They won't be in meeting rooms because we won't have CCTV cameras there, but there will be signage alerting the public that if they enter that area, that there will be CCTV footage.
In here, a council committee meeting, there would be no video or CCTV. Didn't really clarify.
So in the council building here, in public places, there's a sign on the front door when you enter that there's CCTV in public areas. So this room here is a public room. We have CCTV in the corner. So if a meeting was conducted in here, the CCTV is there in the room, but it would only be monitored and looked at if there was, say, an incident happened and we needed to look at footage for the purposes. So otherwise it's not looked at unless there's a particular incident. There's CCTV in the front foyer as well, so in those public areas, and there's notification at the front door when you come in.
Is there a notification here?
No, the notification is at the front door, saying that there's CCTV in public areas in the council offices. So when you come into council offices, that there's the potential for CCTV footage to be taken of you.
Okay, well, whilst I support the policy in regard to, I understand we need to protect our council assets. I do have some issues around where they are and who decides where they go. I don't think I'm over the line on this one. Sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Watson, I did see you raise your hand in there.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I just quite can't see you in the screenshot. I see a lovely Councillor Bennett and CEO, but I believe it's also protecting our assets, Mr Mayor. So I think it's a great thing for, and I'd use one thing as an example as graffiti, maybe on the hyphen, a wall or something like that. Is that it'll make people think secondly about doing acts of vandalism in our city, and I think it's a good policy and a good thing to put into our city. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would also like to clarify a couple of points, please. Now, first of all, I would like to point out one of the things I particularly liked about this new policy. I like the bit where it says a preference for crime prevention is through environmental design and activation over the installation of CCTV systems. That's a good thing to point out. Now, the questions I had, the two questions about whether the location of the cameras will be clearly marked has been answered. Councillor Hall asked that, and a question I have remaining, does it, and excuse my ignorance if I ask something that's technically obvious, but does the system record the sound or just the video?
No sound, just video.
Thank you. The second question is, should somebody, any authorities, for example, police or anybody, request release of particular footage, are there any guidelines as to are there any safeguards as to in what circumstances and at what level of, say, a crime or a breach the footage may be released?
Yes, they are covered, and the police would make a request to me as the CEO, and I would treat every case on its merits. But bearing in mind this is fundamentally around protecting our assets again, or protecting our people. Generally, if the police get involved and the police request access to that video case by case, it's released to them. Thank you.
Thank you. So will a warrant be required to access the footage or just a request?
No, just a formal request from the police and it's recorded.
Thank you very much. Just bear with me a second, please. Tick, tick, tick. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. I think back to you, Councillor Simpfendorfer, in closing.
Thank you. Just probably to close and probably help some of the fellow councillors, it's pretty standard practice across CCTV that's covered in about 11 acts there in the legislation, but also in the standards and guidelines reports with the VAGO or the Auditor General's office that continually have to be reported on as to access and use. I guess in answer to Councillor Courtie's, depending on the level of what the investigation is, would a warrant be required or not? But most of the policies are generally covered, and I think both ends cover really good auditing, particularly this end of the stream. So, look, as I said at the start, it's a really tight policy that does take into the privacy of our citizens, but most importantly for this, the asset protection. And look, unfortunately, we have seen a bit of increase around town with some graffiti on other assets, and hopefully not any of ours, that costs us money then to repair and make it new and good again. So, look, I'm for the policy as it is, and I think it gives good scope to be audited, to be referenced to at any time, and to protect our assets.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillors, I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Carried 5-2. Thank you. On to item 8.2, the Place Naming Policy and Charter Review. The report represents the revised Place Naming Advisory Committee Charter and also the Place Naming Policy for Council consideration. There is a recommendation on page 19 and also of ours and page 12 of the public agenda. Councillors, do I have somebody prepared to move a motion? Councillor Bennett, thank you. As per the recommendation, do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. So the Place Naming Committee, or the PNC, is an advisory committee to council, and there needs to be a review of that. It's actually a couple of years late, so it's good that we're getting to it now. So this advisory committee doesn't make any formal council decisions, but they make recommendations to council. There's a councillor as the chairperson, which is currently Councillor Hall, and there are community members, a representative from Wodonga Historical Society, and council officers. As well, one of the changes in this, which is good, is we'll seek to see if we can get a traditional owner involved. And I think so. I was on the committee in my last term, and certainly there was a lot of issues came up around that. So it'd be really good to have someone at the table who was, qualified to speak on that. So the group, one of their main tasks is to generate a list of suggested names for places and roads, and doing that in the context of honouring the legacy and diversity of Wodonga. So with some of these changes here, we've changed how many community members can be a part of the committee. So that's gone up to 8. Also, a limit on how many terms people, community members can serve, which I think, you know, from a governance point of view, I think it's healthy to have those sorts of set limits on terms in place. And another great thing that has been added is paying the community members $100 per meeting that they attend. And this is so hopefully we can have people, you know, attend to say if they needed to take time off work or say if they needed to get, you know, childcare to attend this meeting. So I think that's fantastic to have that in place. Question to maybe Councillor Hall or might be Officer Klein. When is the next recruitment for a community member, the community members happening?
It's happening in August. So after this meeting, if the policy and the charter is adopted by council, we will go into recruitment. So we'll open up all the nominations. The current members will be notified that their nominations will be open and they're able to re-nominate if they'd like. And we will be looking at having the new committee in place by November.
And as well, could you talk to us about like what's involved in that application? What do community members, you know, who would this appeal to?
The application form talks about anyone with an interest in the history of Wodonga, also about what skills and interests that they have that they might bring to the table, a bit about their background, what they think they can contribute. So it's a fairly simple application, and the interview that then they'll have will really be talking about why do you want to sit on the place naming committee, what skills and qualities do you think that you have that can value add to the process. If they do need some training, then when that training comes up, it'll be considered on a case-by-case basis, but they'll be given an induction as well. So we're hoping that, you know, they'll be well prepared by the time that they have their first meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer, reserve the right. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And a follow on from Councillor Bennett is that one of the land developers in the city actually approached me and said, one thing would be themes. Well, we do themes for our subdivisions and names and things, and one would be famous and women of significance that have been through our city. So I think that's a positive thing, but I think it's positive that we've reviewed this charter and look forward to it being passed tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Hall.
Overall, the policy changes are good and probably much needed. Policy and the charter are better defined and tighten up some of the issues that have been had with the committee of recent. Committee members' positions are better clarified and defined, which is a good thing too. They know should know what's expected of them, and that's a good thing. One thing, I know this brought up in there about $100 per committee member per meeting. That concerns me. Although they don't have to accept that money, it says, but I would hope that people that would put their time up for this probably would do it on their want to do it rather than for the finance side of things. So, yeah, that's something I'm not too agreeing with, but overall the policy I support.
Could I just respond to that and say, yeah, obviously, as it's pointed out, the $100 fee is voluntary, so people don't have to take it. But what we didn't want was for people not to apply. We wanted to encourage diversity of representation on the PNC. And if people had childcare costs to cover or anything like that, or transport costs to get to the PNC meetings, then obviously we didn't want them to be out of pocket. So hopefully we have a lot of volunteers and hopefully people will volunteer, but we didn't want people not to be able to participate because of a financial challenge. Thanks.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Hall. Councillor Mildren, I think that was a raised hand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the functionality and the things that the Place Names Committee is put in place to deal with is, well, you know, it's good, and the changes that have been done to the policy work to that effect. And I think overall the policy is reasonably well written for the purposes that it's there, except there's one statement which I'm hopeful I've misunderstood it, to be honest. But there's one statement in the policy that says something to the effect that the Place Names Committee has no management function and no delegated authority, with staff retaining control under direction of the CEO. If that's doing what I think it's doing, then there's no point having the committee. If it's something different, then I'd be happy to hear that. But it's in under the committee structure bit, which is not sure what number it is.
Look, I'll clarify that. I think the important statement is that the PNC is an advisory committee of the council and is responsible to that body, and that body being the council. So that's certainly not the intention that the organisation would make decisions or override decisions of the PNC. Thank you.
Did that clarify for you, Councillor Mildred?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand the intent, but intent is all well and good. Well, you've got the bunch of people that we have presently. When you get changes in personnel, that gets lost in the fog of life, and we end up with the literal word being the applicable way that things get interpreted, and we find ourselves in difficulties.
I'll just clarify that second statement on page 25 of 250, where it says the PNC does not have any management functions. What that basically means is that the management of council will support the PNC, and that's why there are 3 staff members supporting the chair in that role. But I think it's very clear that the PNC is an advisory committee of the council. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Mildred. Councillor Quilty, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge all the work that Councillor Hall and Councillor Bennett have put into the committee over the years, and it sounds like an interesting committee to be on. I wish I had time. Look, I just have a couple of questions, possibly to Councillor Hall or Councillor Bennett or somebody else who knows a few things about the work of this committee. In the old charter, did we used to have the traditional owner, or is it a new thing coming in? A new, okay. Now, do I understand correctly that in the old charter we didn't have the $100 per person? Okay. And up to 8 members. I understand it's to increase the diversity of the representation, but is it, how likely it is that will be close to 8 members, and is it too much, or is it just a good amount? It's just because I don't know what volume of work and what expertise.
That was another area of concern for me. I think 8's too many, but it does say between 5 and 8, so 8 would probably be on the high side. And I think at the end of the day, it would probably be hard to get 8 people. It's because it's during the week and during the day, you don't get a lot of people that do put their hand up for it. So I think 8 would be on the rarity side of things.
Thanks, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Hall, did you have anything further to add? Sorry, because it was sort of directed at you, Councillor Bennett, just that question at all? Or? You're right to wait. Okay, Councillor Simpfendorfer, you reserved your right. Were you wishing to speak? Okay, Councillor Bennett in closing.
Thanks. So as Councillor Hall mentioned, it can be hard to get people involved in this committee because of it being during the day, and that's why I think it's really important that we have the budget of $100 for if they attend that meeting to make that possible. Most of the people that I know have, work during the day, so they would have to have some time off. I know certainly when I was a student studying history, and working casual, I wouldn't have been able to join a committee during the day. So putting in a few more things in place that might enable some different people to apply who are in different phases of their life, I think is really good. And it's, there's about 4 meetings a year. So that would be a total of $400 a year. So, it's not like a lucrative money-making thing for someone to do, but it could make the difference between someone thinking, yeah, I can do that because I can afford to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillors, I put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. On to item 8.3, the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Policy. So the report does propose that Council revoke the Human Rights Policy and the Social Inclusion Policy and adopt a single comprehensive policy, the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Policy. The officer recommendations on page 43 or page 17 of the public agenda. Would somebody like to move a motion? Councillor Bennett, as per recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. So this is amalgamating two existing policies, the Human Rights Policy and the Social Inclusion Policy. And this policy is actually legislated. So we need to comply as a council, and this paper in front of us is a tool to enable us to do that. And I would like to think that even if this policy wasn't legislated, that we would acknowledge the diversity of our community and ensure that they weren't discriminated upon based on that diversity. So from a governance perspective, I want to just refer to the Local Government Act and 2 sections in particular. So 28.2.A, and that says, in performing the role of a councillor must consider the diversity of interests and needs of the municipal community. And section 46.5, a council and the CEO must, in giving effect to gender equality, diversity and inclusiveness, comply with any processes and requirements prescribed. So even if this, wasn't legislated, I'd like to think that we as a community can acknowledge how different our community is. So this would be looking at, the other policies, projects, communication channels, events that we run, and ensuring that they are accessible to anyone, no matter what their circumstances are. So, Officer Hogg, can I ask you, this is a high-level document, like on the ground for an officer level, what does this look like? Like, give me an example of, if we have this in place, what will that enable for our community?
Councillor Bennett, so given it is proposing to replace 2 existing policies with a single approach, a really good example of how this would be engaged and employed in an operational sense would be in service design and delivery. I think one of our fantastic examples is the new hyphen gallery library. As an example, within that service, one of the agendas within that service is about providing equitable access to information and IT. And we have one of the higher public IT users in libraries across Victoria as an example. So that's how it might sort of facilitate itself on the ground and, for our community on a day-to-day basis. Obviously also with the fee structure put in place is about how do we, yes, optimise income on one level, but also how do we optimise access for diverse organisations across our community so that they can use the facility.
Thank you. It was interesting, the day that I read this policy, it was last Wednesday, which is bin day in my neighbourhood. And on Wednesday, 2 things happen. When the bins get emptied, my dogs go berserk, and there is always, without fail, someone going through the bins to get the bottles and the cans out of the bins. Happens every Wednesday. And last Wednesday, I opened the roller door and saw a woman across the road who I thought that I recognised. So she was wearing like traditional Congolese outfit, and she was carrying one of those really large plastic tartan bags that we probably all have in our garage, and she was collecting cans and bottles. And I thought I recognised her from, it's actually a community impact grant that council did with, I think it was Wodonga Ethnic Communities Council, and myself and the previous mayor went along to meet these Congolese women in our community, and I actually realised some of them were my neighbours, my next door neighbours, and I hadn't realised who they were. And these are all amazingly happy, positive. They were so happy and proud to be in Wodonga. And I was talking to the project officer at this event, and she said most of these women are single, so they're at a very, very high risk of domestic violence, and that going unreported. And the majority of the women in that group had gone through a refugee camp, and again, the majority of the women had been separated from their children, and they still now don't know where their children are. So hearing this, like, you know, I'm in Wodonga, and these women are, so they're making clothing and selling it. That's how they're making an income. They were so happy, so positive, and I just couldn't comprehend that there are people in the community, literally my neighbours, who don't know where their children are. So, you know, when we're looking at this policy, everyone sitting around the table here, we are in a privileged position. I think we really need to remember we are even legislated to have to consider the diversity of our community, and literally, you know, that our neighbours are living vastly different lives than hopefully we will ever have to live. And I would hope that everything council is doing is with the lens of how do we make sure that everyone in our community has equal access to this, that circumstances beyond their control, where they were born, what gender they are, does not discriminate in terms of accessing what we do as a council.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to second this, and hopefully it goes through without any difficulty, but it brings together so many related policies and legislations, as Councillor Bennett has just outlined. But we as a community, since Bone-Gilla during the post-war and during war, to the refugees that we've attracted to our city, which Councillor Bennett talked about, we're very accepting of our community members, and I think that's fantastic. And I think they can live in not in fear in our city, and so this will support all sorts of programs we run in the city, and bringing it all together under one legislation of what we are doing in council with all the other policies and legislations across the state. So very happy to move it. I'll put it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for your input. I particularly enjoyed listening to the passionate speech delivered by Councillor Bennett. I would like to say a couple of words on this policy. I quite liked the point that this policy makes, where it says that differences and diversity are not just to be tolerated, they are to be recognized as one of our greatest strengths. As luck would have it, I happen to be slightly captured by this policy. I, as Councillor Bennett has pointed out, we're all here in a privileged position, but I consider myself particularly privileged. All these years I've lived in Wodonga and in other rural areas in Australia, I have felt safe, recognized, empowered, trusted, welcomed. This policy includes a long list of acts which legislate equity, diversity, inclusion, but I think it's not just in legislation, it is in people's hearts as well, and it's really great. I guess there is a benefit in having this policy in terms of bringing all the legislation and all the information together and making the statement that we are on board with that. But I think that we have there is probably no limit of how we should always think about our neighbors, whether we think they are privileged or underprivileged or disadvantaged. I think the kindness is in people's hearts, and you can't legislate for that. I would definitely, I would feel even safer if the policy contains something to protect the rights of people holding the views, possibly political views that are slightly different from the accepted mainstream. But I think I'm perfectly happy and safe as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillors. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
That off. Thank you. I'll be really quick because I know most of what I wanted to say has already been said, and that's pleasing around the room to hear it. But what really spoke to me when I read it was one of the paragraphs on page 46, and without having to turn everyone there, but the principal outcome sought is to ensure that all residents have the opportunity to achieve their potential and participate in the social, economic and cultural life of our community, helping to drive our future prosperity and build a stronger, more cohesive community. I think that sums it up perfectly. That, you know, I can certainly say, having a front row seat to life at times in this city, we need our community to feel safe. They need to have opportunity. They need to be included, and they need to feel connected. And I think this policy, whilst addresses what it legislatively has to, it's that work about being on the ground and how it works and what it does. So I'll be really keen to see how this plays out over the next couple of years of our term, and attending some of these events that we do and supporting our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Genuine equity and diversity in a community is fundamental and essential to what we do in the way we live, all the things that are associated with the lifestyle that happens in Australia at the moment. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to be careful of, and to protect those important things, those important interests of equity and diversity. We need to make sure that this stuff doesn't get hijacked by political agendas, because there's a lot of efforts to do that across the world at the moment. And we need to make sure that we stick to what's really important to our community, and to make sure that we do genuinely keep equity and diversity happening in our community. Councillor Quilty probably stole the one point that I was interested to perhaps say that we should add in, and that is, we don't reference political discrimination, and frankly, political discrimination is about us, around us. We're probably guilty of it amongst us around this table from time to time. And I think that's something else that we probably should be adding into the policy. We just need to be very careful that we don't allow the other agendas that are creeping into our community, but less so here than perhaps elsewhere in the world, to hijack this whole policy process. It's really important that we keep this on the ground and keep this delivering the things that we've spoken about around the room tonight. And I appreciate Councillor Bennett's remarks that were very well presented and well put. We need to make sure they're the things that we keep in this policy, and not allow it to be hijacked into a political agenda for something that's quite different. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Hall, I think you then had Councillor Bennett in closing.
I actually realised with that story that I was telling, I got sidetracked and I didn't finish it. So I've lifted up my roller door and I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure I recognise her. And so I thought, okay, so I run a 5-bin system at home. So I thought, great, I'm going to run a 6-bin system, and I will leave her a box of my cans. So I walked over to her and said, oh, hello, I'm, and just started, I don't know, saying something. And she saw me and had an absolute look of terror on her face, and started, so she had a limp, but she started to try to get away from me, carrying her big bag of stuff and saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And for me, as, I'm sure other, especially women, have experienced it around this table here, there's times where maybe we've been approached and you do have a reaction of being a bit concerned about this. And, I didn't think that I was being intimidating. It was, during the day, I was probably dressed like a bit of a bogan, but I wouldn't have thought that I was intimidating, but where this person was coming from, I was actually a threat to her, which just is that reminder again of that it is not an equal playing field. It is not an equal playing field, and we are, dealing with people who have just gone through stuff that we can't comprehend. So that's the finish to my story that I happened to experience when I read this policy, and really just thought, this woman, this is collecting cans for 10 cents is a good use of her time. That's what she, in her world, and that me coming up to her and saying, "Oh, I'll run a 6-bin system for you," is actually, a threatening thing. And she was thinking that obviously I was going to have a go at her. So that's my story. And that's it.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. We like story times around here. I therefore put the motion, councillors. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 8.4 is the physical activity strategy. I need to memorise this one a bit better myself. Seeks council endorsement to release the draft strategy for public exhibition. Recommendation is on our page 53, but 22 of the public agenda. Councillors, would somebody like to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor Watson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to move this, and I would like to, at this point, thank the staff putting together the review of the strategy. It's a very important thing because 1 in 3 children within our city are obese or overweight, and men, at least 70% men are overweight in our community. So with me being in Melbourne getting my second hip replacement, I'm on an endeavour to make sure my investment in 2 new hips is worthwhile. I'm going to lose some more kilos. So it's really important that, we as community members, get out and do physical activity in our community. 30 minutes a day, it will help your health and your well-being so greatly. So I thank the staff and I look forward to input from the community of how about you can get some more physical activity within our community.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Yeah, again, looks like the thunder's been stolen, Councillor Watson, but look, I think this is great. Another one of those policies that, has to be there and be included, but again, it's what happens on the ground that makes the most difference for our community. So some of the statistics and the feedback was quite surprising, and I'd encourage us as a council group to, if we don't need to wait 4 years or so to look at this and revisit it with the ever-changing COVID environment, then we should, because now more than ever, when people have got to exercise or do their bit within 5 k's of home. I've never seen anyone out more on the paths and footpaths and cycle paths and everything that we have just for people to stay active and for their mental health. So we see the numbers there, the economic benefits and the social benefits to our community are massive. So we need to keep that up, and if it needs addressing this policy before the expiry date because of the circumstances, then we need to. So in summing, I'll encourage the community to get involved in this one, and probably all the policies that are up for review to have a look at it, see what it means for them personally or their clubs, get engaged with the council support that may need to be in relation to grants or the like, but provide some feedback to this policy. So engage, assist and persist. That's all I can really say, is to engage, assist us and persist with us to make this the best policy we can to make us a better community moving forward.
Thanks, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to provide a little bit of a comment on this policy as well. This policy recognizes the lack of physical activity, which is unfortunate, sedentary lifestyle, and the impact of COVID-19 on the community's participation in physical engagement in physical activity. Recognizes the council's critical role in building the environment for physical activity and supporting the community initiatives. This policy also looks and feels a little bit, to me personally, like a document that might support mountain biking. Not to say that it's a bad or good thing, just making a comment. There are a couple of things that I would like to address as slightly lacking in this policy, and I think it is a mistake to separate out organized sports. I don't honestly, it's this policy is a pretty good effort to address the lack of physical activity and the council role in encouraging it, but I still think it doesn't quite reach the point where we encourage people to get up and go out for a walk more than they are already doing. And I believe that in a lot of times a social aspect or a competition or things that organized sports or even watching organized sports brings with it would be a great tool for us to use to encourage more physical activity. And the other thing I would like to point out is this. This is a nicely put together policy, nice photos to staff have put a lot of work into it. I would like to acknowledge that, but I would like to see councillors to have had, elected councillors to have had more opportunity to represent their community, to safeguard in creating this policy in order to safeguard against spending money disproportionately and safeguard against spending money somewhere where only a small amount of population would engage in a particular activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillors? Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I find myself in an interesting and difficult situation here because fundamentally I support anything and everything that's going to be generating physical activity right across the whole range of things. But I think we're letting ourselves down massively by separating out a physical activity where there's an arbitrary line being drawn somewhere and some of the other semi and totally organised and probably even semi-professional sports that we have in our community, because not only do the sporting clubs and other organisations of a similar ilk, not only do they have playing participants, they also have a myriad of other roles and volunteer activities and things that are generating physical activity. If you go to cricket, you have umpires that umpire cricket. Most of those, apart from the upper levels of the competition, most of those are volunteers. If you go to, the various codes of football, most of those have got, first aid or trainer people. They've got boundary umpires or linesmen. They've got a whole range of other people that do other jobs that associate with those particular things. So I think by separating active sports out and the physical activity strategy, we're letting ourselves down. And I think we could actually do a far more comprehensive and much wider reaching policy to achieve all the very good objectives that turn out in this policy if we were to run those things together and create a more uniform approach to things. And as Councillor Quilty said, the other thing that disappoints me, and this goes with some other policy documentation as well, I feel that I don't actually have a sense of ownership of this document because I've had no real participation in its preparation. It comes up to us as a draft document without a proper formal structure where councillors can actually say, well, from the angle that I come from or the people that I associate with, they see X, Y, Z as being something that's important to this, and then we can shuffle through and get priorities and so on for the high-end strategic approach to this sort of stuff. The way it's done at the minute, we haven't been doing that. It's been an officer report, and it's a very good report. I'm not being critical of it in that context whatsoever. I'm just saying I don't have a sense of ownership of it because I haven't been part of the production of it. And the other thing that comes out of this document, I know there's always going to be a need for an element of, let me call it public relations or community communications. I'm not sure what the jargon term that's trendy at the moment is, whichever one it is. I'm not sure that that we get the balance right with what we spend on the marketing and what we spend on the actual facilities and the physical equipment or the physical spaces or whatever the other stuff is that goes with it. I think the balance needs to be something that should be addressed more directly by councillors, and I think we're probably dropping the ball on a few of those things on compared to what we could achieve. Not saying that this is not a good documentation, it is, and it's been well written and everything else, but I just think we're missing a whole lot of stuff that we could be putting in here and improving this exponentially. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milton. Did you notice your sporting analogy in there, dropping the ball? I'm not sure if that was intended or not, but well done. Yeah. Councillor Hall or Councillor Bennett? Councillor Bennett.
So this is just the draft of this document. So there's still a lot of, if this gets up tonight, scope for individuals, clubs, workplaces to have their say in terms of shaping this. Something that I really like about this is that the terminology active living, acknowledging that it's, physical activity is a lot more than just maybe being involved in an organised sport, and acknowledging the links that active living has with, people managing stress and mental health things. Also, it's great to see that the amount of physical activity that adults are doing in Wodonga is actually increasing. So acknowledging that, and I'm absolutely sure COVID has had something to do with that, but there are a lot of organisations and individuals and volunteers that have been working really hard to do this. So fantastic that we're actually the interventions that have been happening in our community are working. And I think, so this strategy too acknowledges that, council isn't the holder of all things physical activity. This is saying we are really actively working with other people in our community, other organisations that, do this maybe even better than council does. So I think that's great that we've been liaising with them in the making of this. And one other question. So from this, I know, like, for example, say our, council plan, municipal public health and wellbeing plan, there is, it's a high level document. From here, is there an action plan? What can I see after the end of this?
So the proposal is before councillors for this document to go out for public comment, and we would certainly welcome suggestions, proposals, changes during that period. Once the document was consolidated, it would be brought back to council for adoption. As you can see, it's a multi-year strategy. Dropping out annually would be an annual action plan. The budget for that action plan comes to before council, along with the budget each June for consideration and adoption. And I think it's probably worth noting too that this is quite different to the sport and rec strategy. So we do have a sport and recreational strategy, separate strategy dedicated to more organised sports and the precincts that support that. We are in the process of revising that separate strategy and looking at that with Albury City Council too. So that will come back to councillors as well.
Yep, cool. I was just thinking because some people might have high level feedback, but some people might have feedback that would probably sit in an action plan. Yep. And I just wanted to touch on one point with Councillor Quilty in terms of the mountain biking. It does say in the strategy where it lists what Wodonga people, what their, the most popular physical activity and active living in is, and one of them is mountain biking. So, of course, we would have to acknowledge that and have that in the strategy if that's what we know a big portion of our community are doing.
Councillor Mildred.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was one of the points in relation to where we draw the line. If we look at netball, cricket, a whole lot of other physical activities, there are far more people doing that than there are riding push bikes. Now, that doesn't diminish the bike riding by one little bit, but there are far more people doing those. And we've had that presented to us by the people that are at high levels engaged in the other activities. So that's interesting at where we draw the line between this strategy and the physical activity or the sporting strategy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. I think Councillor Hall, Councillor Quilty, I'm guessing has a question, but did you want to speak before she asks her question? Or Councillor Quilty just raised her hand. She's already spoken, but did you want to add?
A lot of it's been covered, but I'd just add that I note here that the survey, a total of 159 responses were received, 69% were female, 39% were male, which is quite interesting. That generally I would have thought might have been the other way around. I don't know why that is. Maybe they're responding on behalf of their children or what have you. But overall, yeah, I think we do need a physical activity strategy. We need to get people moving. Obesity and health issues is a major concern for our community. One of the biggest things I've seen, especially with the COVID, over the last 18 months, is walking their dogs. How many people are just getting out there and walking their dogs? It's something simple, cost nothing, and if we can keep pushing that, I think that's probably one of the number one things we could list on this physical activity strategy.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. Councillor Quilty had a question.
Thank you. No, not a question. I just realized I forgot to mention. I realized we are not discussing organized sports. We're organizing physical activity strategy, but I thought I would take the opportunity to mention that it is organized sports in particular that took a big hit due to COVID-19 and all the lockdowns, while physical activity, walking the children, walking the dogs may have increased during and possibly to some extent due to lockdowns. Organized sports have taken a big hit, and it may reflect on all the facets of life of our community and prosperity of our community. So while I recognize that it's not what we are discussing today, I think it's something that we should look at and discuss at length when looking at sports and physical activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Watson in closing.
No further comment, Mr. Mayor, but yeah, let's get out and pay and walk those footpaths. I know there's a lot more women, and that's what the response from more women might be, is because they're out there walking a lot more. Yeah, so thanks, Mr. Mayor, and also I'm just going to change from my earpods to the speaker on the phone.
Can you allow me to put the motion first, Watson, just so you can hear what I'm saying? That'd be great. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you. Carried 6-1. Councillor Watson, take a moment to change over as we get ourselves ready for item 8.2. Sorry, 8.5. I'll get my numerics right. The report presents for the draft cultural services plan for Council's consideration. Recommendation on page 92 of your agenda, 27 of the public agenda. Councillors, do I have somebody to move? Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. As per the recommendation, yes. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, yeah, this again is another draft plan that will go out for community involvement, hopefully, and hopefully we get a lot of feedback, because the arts and entertainment industry has really been left out in the cold, pardon the pun, with the pandemic. I've seen firsthand how that's affected many shows and events locally, but also beyond here. So it's timely this policy is due for renewal, and again, like the previous policy, we may need to revisit it at some point depending on what COVID looks like. But again, it's addressing a lot of the legislative requirements, but again, it's about how this will look for us on the ground, whilst engaging our youth will be critical, and it's good to see, and our culture. So probably a good segue into hyphen, again, pardon the pun, but I'm sure you see what I did there. It's an amazing space that we can enjoy and benefit from. So along with the Cube, do you like that one? Yeah. It really puts Wodonga on the map, and it's something that is lacking, unfortunately, for us, the arts and entertainment. So anything that we can do to get this cultural services plan up and going and in effect would be good. We've got a lot of audience, we've got a lot of people passionate about it. It's not something I've dipped my feet into for long, but it's an important part of who we are and what we are moving forward as a city, and no more so than what we've got with hyphen and where that can take us into the coming years. So look, I like it essentially as a draft policy, and I'll welcome any feedback from the community.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Bennett, reserve your right. Councillors? Councillor Mildren, look like you're ready to go.
With respect, this is actually being adopted tonight. It's not a draft policy going out for consultation, it's actually being adopted. Again, I find myself in a difficult position. Cultural services to me mean a whole lot of things to a whole lot of places, but and there's some really, really good stuff in this. But there's also I don't like using the word tendency, but it's a drift towards ratepayer funds transfer to other organisations that deliver culture or cultural activities, and some of that is probably good. Some of it, I think, we pick winners when we leave others out of the equation. Some are fashionable at a given point in time and get well looked after, and others become less fashionable and fade into the background, and sometimes we lose them and they disappear altogether. But I think just the way this document reads to me is it's more about transfer of ratepayers' funds. That seems to me to be the principal focus, and I think we're losing the really good bits that come out of it, or no, not losing, but are being overshadowed by the concept that seems to infiltrate through the document that looks at just council handing out money to support these things. So I find it very difficult to actually articulate this because it's well and truly written through the fabric of the document. So and that's why I find myself in a difficult position, because I quite like many of the aspects of this, and I think they're very good actions and activities for council. Again, I think part of the problem might be that I just don't feel ownership of this document because we really haven't had a lot to do with putting it together. There's things that I probably would have suggested. I might not have had the numbers to pull it off, but I would have probably suggested that we do in a different way, or approach differently, or have our priorities different. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Bennett, question?
Just help me understand. So when you say transferring ratepayers' money to something else, so when we're, putting money aside in our budget for, toilet facilities at Martin Park, we're transferring ratepayers' money. So help me explain. Like, what do you mean by? Yeah, help me explain.
It's akin to the notion of welfare transfer payment, but it's not exactly the same thing. When we use ratepayers' money to manage and deal with and improve council facilities or council direct activities, then that's using ratepayers' money for the purposes that it's paid to us for. When we use that money to hand over to I'll call them third party, but there's so much of variation in what a third party might be, but we hand money over to a third party, then that's a transfer payment of the ratepayers' funds that have been paid to council as a contribution to the running and management of the things that the council is charged to manage and maintain. In other words, I know the new Local Government Act has moved the scale on this a fair bit, and it now regards ratepayers' funds as being money paid into a consolidated revenue as a taxation. Up until this Act came into place, the money that was paid by ratepayers was paid to the council to manage a service, and the service was then defined under the relevant legislation, and there was several bits of legislation. Now that has shifted a bit with the latest Act, but the principle still applies. The ratepayers pay the money to council for a specific range of activities, range of functionalities. And managing council-owned land or land that council's responsible for, as distinct for Committee of Management of, there's another one that might come up on that later tonight. But when the council looks after the land that it is responsible for, then that's appropriate use of the ratepayers' money. We might argue about the priorities and who should get what and all the rest of it, and that's fair game. But when the money is handed to, in my words, third-party organisations, then it's a transfer payment of ratepayers' money to a third party. Now, it might be a perfectly good and legitimate thing that we're handing the money over for, just we need to be very conscious that that's what it's all about. And we need to be able to get the balances right on how that all fits together.
Okay, thank you. Officer Hogg, can I just get your thoughts on, you were the one who wrote this report. Can you, with that, you know, transfer of ratepayer money to a third party, can you just, what's your comment on that? You know, because I'm thinking, say we give money to Hothouse, but that's a council, like that's on, it's a council, on a, that's a council, on council land? Council facility. So, yeah, I'm struggling working that out. Yeah.
Sorry. The proposed strategy before you covers a range of council services, which you can see listed on page 107, including the new hyphen, so the Wodonga Library Gallery, the Bonegilla Migrant Experience, events and event attraction, which is a program that council runs, the Community Cultural Development Program, and the Cube Wodonga. They're your key assets that, or key services and functions that this strategy is setting a strategic objective for. In regards to organisations that are supported, cultural organisations that are supported, some of those organisations are supported through Community Impact Grant Program, which then comes to council for decision. Some other organisations, cultural organisations, are supported by formal MOUs. I think, to my knowledge, there's about 3 or 4 of those MOUs in place, and again, they come to council for decision at the term of those MOUs. Apart from that, they're the only sort of cross, I suppose, organisational ones that I can think of where we may be contributing money to an organisation's operational project or otherwise. Apart from that, the Community Impact Grant is, you know, the grant program is referenced as one of the strategic objectives, but it is about the services that I've just listed.
Councillor Bennett, sorry, I've got my microphone open. Have you got another question, or are we going to move on with the debate? Yeah. So, question, or happy to wait, since you've reserved your right? Yep, that's okay. Councillors in the debate, thank you, Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, councillors and Officer Hogg, for this very engaging debate, and thank you for putting this document in front of us. Again, it contains some nicely proposed services and some nice photos. I would like to point out that I love art. I love theatre, I love books. I, by the way, would like to, once again, for the 100th time, acknowledge all the work that went into creating the library gallery. As we can see today, it's beautiful. I love street art, and I think Wodonga is very beautiful, not just due to its natural landscape, but also due to all the facilities that we already have. However, me wouldn't be me if I didn't get to page 20 of this document and stopped and went investment in infrastructure, venues, community programming and events, community impact grants, and so on and so forth. I think Councillor Mildren mentioned that ratepayers' money is essentially given to us in order we could manage on behalf of the community, manage the infrastructure and provide the services. And this document is about services, it is about cultural services. However, I would like to see more safeguards in this document, not just the fact that things here and there will come up to budget. Some of them will, some of them will fall under delegation. I would like in this kind of document to see more safeguards against spending hard-earned and with difficulty parted with ratepayers' dollars I would like safeguards against putting it towards projects that may be, or maybe a couple of, say, 2 projects or more projects existing that are running at a loss, giving out community impact grants left, right, and center instead of letting volunteer groups take more charge of that. I'm not saying it's happening massively, and like I said, we've seen some really nice developments, like the library. However, I would like to see a document that has a lot more financial safeguards than we currently have. And also, I can't help myself. I would like to, on a lighter note, the people who haven't seen Yes Minister series. This discussion reminds me of the bit where the minister and his staff are discussing whether subsidizing Royal Opera is in any way better than subsidizing football. That's just, I think it's hilarious. It's funny that we have something similar discussing here, and that just to add the lighter note to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Bennett. Yep.
Can I get a comment from the officers about what safeguards are put in place?
Well, what I would say is that this is an overarching high-level strategy, but with this specific example that was mentioned around the community impact grants, they are obviously considered by a panel of people that looks at the grants, looks at the value for money aspect of those, and then makes a recommendation up to council. So that there's certainly safeguards in those community impact grants coming up to council for a decision at some time in the future.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge too, there would be, KPIs put in place that if, the project, has to meet certain standards for us to be, even though it's a small amount of money, we would still have an agreement in place. Is that correct?
All grants or MOUs do have formal agreements in place with specific KPIs that are built against the guidelines of which organisations apply against, and they are assessed at the end of the expiry of that grant period.
Thank you, Director Hogg. Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Watson or Councillor Hall? Just haven't heard from either of you on this one yet. Did you have it yet? Councillor Hall?
I haven't got much to add, but I do think the council do some fantastic work in this space. The library is, look, that's an example, but also Bonagilla and there's many others. But it does come, all of this does come at a cost to the ratepayers and the council. It's not cheap. I also confer with Councillor Mildren's comments that he doesn't feel that he's, with this policy and probably with many other policies that do come across the table, that he has any ownership of it. And I can relate to this because as a council, we don't really get many opportunities to discuss policies, committees and strategies. COVID hasn't helped over the last 12 months or so, and councillor briefings are very restrictive. We cannot make decisions, debate, nor build a consensus between councillors during these sessions, and we cannot direct staff or endorse any actions, decisions that council may choose to make. So therefore, it gives us very little opportunity to give our sort of view, footprint on too many of the strategies and policies that do come up. It's really a matter of us either accepting, maybe adding to, or adding to, or what have you, but we don't really get much of an opportunity, and I think it's something as a council we probably need to look at going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Watson, before I go to Councillor Bennett, who reserved the right, you got it right. Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thank you to Officer Hogg and all her team to make a community, to make a city really thumping along. We have diversity within it, and that's both sporting, both culturally, both our environment and both our Indigenous people. So I think this is a fantastic document that makes sure that things are happening in our city, and I commend the staff and everything else that's gone before this to put it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Bennett.
Just a quick comment about, I think it's interesting that this has come up at the same time as a physical activity, because often, that's a big investment. We do a big investment into physical activity, but I think that we also need to be doing a big investment into cultural services. And if we were looking at, percentage-wise, how much we've put towards cultural services, it would be less than physical activity. I say that and wondering if that's correct.
From an operational service perspective, there's a broader operational service covered under this particular strategy. I think from an infrastructure perspective, it's probably quite a different story though, and that's over a long period of time though.
I just say that because, both physical activity and having different cultural things to do are so important, for our city. So making sure that we, assign the budget that this deserves. And also just well done on the hyphen. I think that what we managed to do on a significantly less budget than, say, Albury, is phenomenal. So well done to everyone involved for all those, projects, and running such an amazing program of events on, compared to others, a reasonably small budget.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer, you were the mover, believe it or not.
Yes, a while ago. I think just a couple of points of clarification. I can't recall if it was Councillor Milne or Councillor Quilty, but a comment was made that some events were sort of overshadowed more than others, and I can't remember where that was. Being new to this plan, is there any examples that can be given in regards to that comment? I can't remember. I think it might have been Councillor Milne. I think there's some examples about some of them. I think the context was some events or some projects were more overshadowed than others, as in, I think the inference was more favoured towards, I think it might have been Councillor Mildred.
I'm not prepared to rattle off examples because there's community groups that this speaks to, and there'll be winners and losers. And the thing about it is it varies over at different times and different places and different councillors around the table, and the whole thing varies. And some people might argue that this balances out over a 50-year period, but I see things happening now where I need to be very careful, because if I name one group, then I need to name everybody, and that's difficult. But there are some, shall I call them, more traditional cultural organisations that tend not to be seen as the flavour of the times, that don't get the support that perhaps they once did, or perhaps they might need to survive, or and they're getting overshadowed by the others. And there's other things that are, culturally, and I think, I forget who said it, but they mesh together. Might have been Councillor Bennett said some of the sporting and things all mesh together to make part of the cultural fabric, and that's absolutely correct. but there are some groups that aren't fashionable and they get overshadowed by those that are fashionable. And I don't want to name names because it'd be unfair on the groups that get named. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Milner, Mr. Mayor. I think for me, and thank you for pointing out that this isn't a draft, this is being adopted, so that's my error there. But the Cultural Services plan to 2026 is I think where this is, and we sort of drifted off into a community grants debate for a little bit, so it lost me a little bit there. But I think this services plan for now and what we have until 2026 is a wonderful working document that I'll be supporting tonight with my vote, so we can move forward in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillors, I therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All those against? Carried 4-3. On to item 8.6, the Wodonga Historical Society update report. You'll see around the relocation, the Bonagilla migrant experience, and also the MOU is what we're considering this evening. Recommendation is on page 129. Page 32 of the public agenda. Would somebody like to move a motion? Was that Councillor Watson? Sorry, yes. That's as per the recommendation.
Yes.
And Councillor Mildren.
As per recommendation.
So Councillor Watson moving, Councillor Mildren seconding. Councillor Watson, fire away.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I like to think that part of this document is that they're going for the medium-term solution. Venue out to Bonagilla. I think this is a fantastic thing. There was a bit of talk in the paper and things saying, it's a loss to our city. Well, Bonagilla is part of our city and part of our whole region. So I think in the short term it's going to be great. We're going to continue on collating the collections we have. And I think people who are going out to see Bonagilla will get a double whammy to see our other history of our city. So I hope that this gets through. And I'd also like to publicly say to all those on the committee, and some are retiring this year, the amazing, outstanding efforts they've done over the years to keep our history together in one area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Mildren? Reserve. Thank you. Councillors? Councillor Hall?
Yes, I support the MOU with the Wodonga Historical Society, but we must not lose our motivation and commitment to find a place in Wodonga so that they can have a permanent and we adequately provide for their needs going forward. So whilst the Bonagilla will be, I agree with Councillor Watson, it will be quite a nice change for a while. Actually, it'd be nice to go out there and see an exhibition with their stuff up on the walls in one of the, I don't know what they call them, dongas, or they're not dongas, but one of the facilities out there. But it's probably not the most appropriate place going forward, in preserving, all the photographs and, because there are temperature and what have you issues that probably over a period of time could create a problem. So we do need to not keep our foot off looking for a place in town here for them going forward. So, and I think our community would expect us to support such a great organisation. So yes, I'll support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillors? Councillor Quilty was first.
Oh, thank you. Nothing new, and just very briefly, I was going to make this comment also that we need to continue our endeavours to find a place in Central Wodonga for the Historical Society and their valuable collection. Although it seems like a good solution at the moment, I believe in the future the Society and its collection should be placed centrally. Hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you. I just wanted to also point out that in the paper it does talk about that the Wodonga Historical Society are, although this is not a long-term solution, that they are happy with going out to BMI. So that's important to know that they're supportive of this as well. And in terms of those comments around having a place in the CBD, it's so awesome seeing what they've done at Hyphen. The exhibition that they've put together there is amazing, seeing those photos of our main street and how it's changed. So I really love how they've done that, and hopefully even that just sparks more people's interest in terms of maybe being involved. And I'll also, as a plug, send everyone the membership form for the Wodonga Historical Society. It's $20, a good $20.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
I'll just jump in quickly. I want to probably reiterate what Councillor Hall said. I agree. I think it's very critical that this remains part of what we are as a city, and the history doesn't fall away. It was news to me to hear from Councillor Watson that some are retiring, and hopefully we can get some uptake there, either from those in the committee or the membership. I'll be joining for sure. So one more on there. Look, and again, when I read that some of the exhibits are going to be going into Hyphen, I think it'll be a great cross-pollination, I guess, of being able to push the Bone-Gilla migrant experience for those visitors that are going to Hyphen. We can sell that aspect for any visitors that may be coming, and those that are interested in the history, because I'm sure my parents will come out when they can in post-COVID and head on out there. So I think it's really, really critical that we maintain that pressure, as Councillor Hall said, and making sure that we stay with it and work with it, but also pleasing to hear that in the short term they're happy to go. It's a good solution for what we have, because there has been a lot of commentary online about it and a fair few opinions, but I think it is important to say this is an agreed decision, and with the MOU going forward to help them out, it's critical for our history.
Thank you, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Mildren, reserved.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first thing I want to say is basically that the elected councillors did not make the decision to relocate or to house the Historical Society at Bone-Gilla. But I think in the circumstances it's probably the right outcome, because to stay where they are would be a difficult problem, not least of which it's now changed ownership, and the new owners are clearly looking for market rents, which are essentially central city market rents, which is understandable. And in terms of finding locations for the Historical Society, wherever we look in the absolute centre of our town, we will face the issue of economic rent versus ability to pay. And frankly, the Historical Society in the foreseeable future is unlikely to be able to pay actual market rents in the centre of the city unless we can put it together with some other combined group of activities. I don't want to pick any of them, name any of them particularly tonight, but there's quite a few of them around the place that we could look at joining these together and get a new building and get some federal and or state government funding and community support to build a facility that accommodates this and whoever the other groups might be. There's a number of cultural groups in our community that are under threat by one means or another, or are taking accommodation that is less than perfect for sustaining their activities over the longer term. They're basically having to do it for a whole range of different reasons, but the outcomes are not dissimilar. I think we need to work reasonably quickly to bring the Historical Society back into the central area of town. I would suggest somewhere on the fringe of the central business district. For the reasons I outlined before, I don't think it's practical or appropriate to try and put it into the central business area itself. We need to look at somewhere on the fringe. And I think we need to do that very quickly because, as our esteemed Professor of History once said, the tyranny of distance will kill the organisation. Now, it's not the tyranny of distance of getting people to go and have a look at the place, because many people that go to the Bone-Gilla experience will go and have a look at it. But it's getting the volunteers to stay motivated and to stay able to keep the attention that's necessary to be going out there to an area that's not readily accessible other than by car by and large. And particularly if we have a significant number of people who are not in their most youthful state, that might include me. But I think they're the things that we need to be taking a pragmatic and practical approach to. And I think we do need to move very quickly. I think the 3 years that we're putting in here, I think at the end of that 3 years, our target should be that we've got another piece of purpose-built specific accommodation in the centre of town or on the fringe of the central business district. And I think that should be our target. The second thing I'd say is we're applying belts and braces, and I have seconded the motion, but we're applying belts and braces to the motion because this 23,500 has actually already been approved through the budget process anyway. So that was done and dusted. And to go back to the cultural services, this is the sort of thing that we need to be making specific decisions about in acknowledging that this is something that we are transferring ratepayers' money. And I hope I didn't get misunderstood in the previous conversation. I'm not saying we should never transfer ratepayers' money. We should be very, very seriously and specifically considering every one of them, not just in a broad budget sweep that we do it now. And frankly, that's why I think it's a good thing that this has come back to say endorse the 23,500, even though we've already approved it in the budget. So we need to do a lot of things, and we need to work really hard to facilitate the continuation of the Historical Society and the maintenance of the various amazing collections that they have. The other thing that we're going to have to be very careful of is that the facility that we're now temporarily housing them in actually doesn't cause detriment to any of those artefacts and things that we've got. And temperature in the buildings is going to be something that's really important to watch. I'm not sure what arrangements are being done through the MOU. I haven't seen the MOU, but that's probably okay. But we need to make sure that we don't put any of this stuff at threat. Sorry if I've talked too long, Mr. Mayor.
I was going to suggest time. Councillor Bennett.
So that's an interesting point that you raise around the collection and how valuable it is. So, Officer Hogg, could you answer that one?
The conditions provided at the Bongilla Migrant Experience will not be dissimilar to the conditions of their present location, so which is a base level climate control. It's a base level heating cooling system, nothing more advanced. So the present location does not have humidity control, for example. That's a very, very unique, tailored scenario. Often reserved for museums, and I'm not saying it's not important, it certainly is, but it's a fairly expensive piece of infrastructure. But the preservation of the collection has also been stepped up quite a lot by the committee over recent years, even with appropriate storage of items, etc. So that knowledge base has grown, and I know they're making every attempt within their resources to do so.
Thank you, Officer Hogg. Councillor Watson, in closing.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I'm aware that my iPads last an hour. They're recharged, but I don't want to go an hour for them to run down. But in closing, and I think Councillor Bennett made a very great comment about, Hyphen is actually displaying some of the great artefacts and photos and things we have, and we are digitising the collection, which is really important. But Mr. Mayor and Mr. CEO, I think this is one of those strategic things. We could go and visit other local government areas that do historical collections and things like that and see how other local government areas do it, because, this is a great thing to do, go and do some research and come back to our city and come back to the historical group. So once again, thanks for being very supportive, Councillor Hogg, of our, and I think it's a great partnership that we have between our two partnerships with the committee and our council. So I no further ado but put the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Watson. Put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 8.7, the tender for management services of the Wodonga Racecourse and Showgrounds. There's an officer recommendation on page 136 and it's page 39 of the public agenda. Would somebody like to move a motion? Thank you, councillor Simpfendorfer. Is that as per the recommendation? Yes. And did councillor Watson, did that say your hand for a second then, was it? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Simpfendorfer.
Yeah, this become a little bit topical and confusing around who owns what land and where and how, but there were some maps provided to us which made a bit more sense. But look, the procedure of the tender has been followed, and I think you know, it's a credit to that process and consideration of cost effectiveness being done by that panel, even if there was just the one tender from my understanding. Is that correct? Yeah, so look, that the policy is there and is followed and comes out with this recommendation. So I'll be supporting it as it reads.
Thank you, councillor Simpfendorfer. Councillor Watson.
I'll be very quick, Mr Mayor. I think having the racecourse being, I know it's a single application to run it, but they'll have a keen interest to make the place look fantastic, and the quality of service should be very good because it's in their best interest to do the service as well. So thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Watson. Councillors. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not 100% sure where to start and how to deal with this. I was responsible for getting this deferred, I guess, at the last meeting, and I don't feel like the reasons and the matters that I referred to in regard to that have been addressed and dealt with in any way. As a matter of principle, the outcome of this is probably what I would regard an appropriate way of managing the site, but the process and the methodologies that have been used to get there, I think are entirely inappropriate. Now, I can stand to be corrected on a number of these things, and some of this might be old hat and there might well have been legislative change that means that I'm living in the past, but somehow I don't think so. The first thing about it is it's very complex because part of the land is actually council land, a small part. Part of the land is owned by another organisation, being the Show Society, and part of the land is Crown land, which is essentially government land, and the government, it's essentially a recreation land as Crown land, and the governments, over many governments in the state of Victoria, have created committees of management which are separate entities under different legislation. They are a committee of management, and a committee of management can be appointed by or appointed inclusive of any number of people and does not have to be a council, does not even have to be connected to council. In many cases, in smaller rural communities, the committees of management are made up of just local people, and most of it's volunteer stuff to manage facilities, inclusive of racecourses. The committee of management in this situation is the council, and it's appointed as a committee of management over the Crown land. Now, there's been, and we haven't been provided with the detail as to how the rest of the agreement for management is structured together, how the Show Society have actually committed to be part of it, and the council has committed to be part of it as the landowner on another parcel of the land. But so in some component of this, the council has a financial responsibility to manage the land that the council owns. The council does not have a financial responsibility to manage the land that is the committee of management land or the land that is owned by the Show Society in the first instance. Now, we may have entered into agreements over time that suggests that we will take responsibility for managing the whole lot as a committee of management or by some other means. But we are the Committee of Management in terms of the racecourse land. Now, that's part of the land to which this tender relates, all right? Now, in history, a Committee of Management looked after and managed its own funds and dealt with its own expenditures and management and whatever else that it had to do. And from time to time, councils would allocate money specifically and deliberately as a grant, in effect, to a Committee of Management to deal with the activities that they're doing. We haven't done any of that with this. We're just acting as if it's council money and it's council land and we're doing stuff as council. We are not the council when we act as the Committee of Management in the way I understand how these things work. So, and I tried to ask these questions and I might not have been able to articulate things the way to get it across to others to understand where I was coming from, but the answers that come back didn't reflect what I was trying to get to. In addition, minor thing, but I don't think we've even got an instrument of delegation as the Committee of Management to our council staff, which exposes our staff in the first instance and then exposes us as the Committee of Management in the second instance as well. So I think there's procedure and process stuff there that we need to tidy up. Maybe this is as simple as tonight passing a specific resolution that the council provide ratepayers funds to the Committee of Management for the allocation to deal with this tender. The question as to whether or not the tender is legitimate, given that it was called under a delegated process, and in ordinary times that would be perfectly normal, but in this situation I don't think it stacks up. So if we were to pass a resolution tonight that was specifically to provide ratepayers funds to cover the cost of this contract, I think that's okay, but does it legitimise the actual tender process that we're putting the money to? I don't know the answer to that one. So...
Councillor Mildren, sorry. Just going to ask the CEO to clarify maybe and some of your concerns, hopefully, with his response, if I could. Thanks, CEO.
Yeah, look, I'll keep it brief. We're certainly aware of Councillor Mildren's concerns over the, I guess, the validity of the Committee of Management, but we've run this past our lawyers and we've run it past our the relevant government department, and it's certainly the case that the council can operate like this. It's a great value for money use of council funds, but the Local Government Act actually comes into play here, and local councils appointed as a Committee of Management are subject to a regulatory regime that's primarily governed by the Local Government Act, so not quite the same guidelines as the Committee of Management. So because of Councillor Mildren's concerns, we tested this with the lawyers, we tested it with the relevant government department, and it's entirely appropriate. It's a really good value for money outcome for council, and we thoroughly recommend it, and really respecting Councillor Mildren's views, we don't agree with them. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Mildren?
In light of the advice we've just got, why wasn't that advice included in the report and responding to the issues when I raised them at the last council meeting?
CEO, take that as a question.
It was sent to all the councillors last Tuesday, I believe, by an email. I've got the email in front of me.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillors? No. In closing, sorry, Councillor Quilty.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mildren and Mr. Dixon. I'm not actually going to support or oppose any views. I just want to clarify that, and I am sure this is not the first and the last time that we are dealing with a piece of Crown Land as a committee of management. So do I understand correctly that there's no requirement for a so-called Chinese wall between the actions of the Committee of Management and action of the Council, that it can be treated as one of the Council affairs and mingled with so it doesn't require a separate contract, a separate... it's just because I don't know as much as the lawyers and Councillor Mildren about committees of management, and I thank Councillor Mildren for bringing it up because it increases our education as councillors and possibly makes us less complacent and making sure that we are doing the right thing and we are not exposing ourselves as councillors and council staff. So do I understand correctly that there is no requirement for so-called Chinese wall, that it can be intermingled, that there is no with council affairs, and that there is no particular requirement for a specific instrument of delegation?
Sorry, can I just clarify so I can understand the answer? What do you mean by... Sorry, can I just clarify so I can understand the answer? Sorry, what do you mean by Chinese wall?
It's a term that I heard... it's a term that I heard often in my professional career. Sorry, it's probably not an appropriate place to use. It's often used when, for example, an accounting firm is not supposed to provide audit services to the same customers as they provide financial reports to, or wherever services for the purposes of integrity, services provided have to be separated or provided by a different organization or the departments, or if they're provided by the different departments within the same organization, there has to be a big, tall, long wall in between them. It's, sorry, I just, this is the terminology that I operate.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty, for clarifying. For Councillor Bennett, CEO.
So look, we are, as I've said, we are operating entirely appropriately, and we've checked that with the government department, and whilst again we respect Councillor Mildren's views, we haven't had any evidence from him to substantiate his view and how that may differ to the advice that we've received from the department or from our lawyers. But to I might ask Officer Hogg just to touch on how this actually operates, so you have an understanding of the arrangement that's in place, that's been in place since 2013.
Thank you, CEO. And look, I welcome the questions because it's always good, as Councillor Quilty has pointed out, to provide some rigour around the understanding. So the advice we've got is very much that local councils appointed as the Committee of Management are subject to the regulatory regime primarily governed by the Local Government Act, and definitely not the same guidelines expected of Volunteer Committee of Management. And that whilst as a COM, as a Committee of Management, we still are required to take things before the department, including leases, licences and infrastructure works. But outside of those three items of leases, licence and infrastructure works, all other items are trusted to local government for us to undertake in accordance with the Local Government Act and our appropriate governance policies and procedures. So no further obligations exist, and that's the advice that we've received.
Councillor Mildren, question.
So in the event that we get a conflict between the interests of the Committee of Management and the Council, how do we resolve it? How do we deal with that?
CEO, the appropriate person to respond. Simone, thank you. Oh, sorry, Officer Hogg.
So there is no Committee of Management on the ground. There are stakeholders and user groups who access it. There are leases and licences put across the precinct. Again, those leases and licences are approved by the department, but there is no Committee of Management. There are stakeholders. As a part of this service management agreement, the Turf Club would be chartered with meeting with those stakeholders And as a council, we also do meet with those stakeholders to ensure that we are over some of those issues, concerns and operational factors that help us optimise what occurs on the precinct.
Thank you, Director Hogg. Councillor Hall or Councillor Bennett, either speaking? No? Councillor Hall? No? Okay. In closing, Councillor Simpfendorfer, nothing further to add. Councillors therefore put the motion. All those in favour? All opposed? Thank you. Carried 4-3. On to item 8.8, the 2021 General Revaluation. All rateable and non-rateable properties in Wodonga. The information there with the recommendation on page 141 of our agenda, or 44 of the public agenda. Would Councillor like to move a motion? Thank you, Councillor Watson. As per the recommendation, do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. It's legislation obligation, and I don't think there needs to be much debate and put the motion forward.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, but the evaluations are now, well, they have been for some, I think 3 years now, been done annually rather than biannually, every 2 years. This is state government requirements, so council don't play much of a part in this area, but it is vital when we come to doing our rate assessments. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillors? No. Anything in closing, Councillor Watson? Are you happy for me to put the motion? All those in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. On to item 8.9, the collaborative procurement curbside waste collection services. The purpose of this report is obviously to say that the council will remain a partner in the cross-border collaborative procurement of curbside waste collection services, as we are with councils on both sides of the border. Officer recommendation on page 149 or 48 of the public agenda. Would somebody like to move? Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Have I got a seconder as per the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Mildren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a pretty logical sort of conclusion. However, having said all that little statement, there's a potential that this could be brought into a different domain, if you like, when it comes time for the state government to start addressing the waste management issues that they've already. These sorts of issues are already topical, shall we say, in Metro Melbourne, and I think there's every likelihood that the state government may choose to require unity across the state and may say that we can't cross the border, so to speak. So I think by making this statement and passing this resolution tonight, we'll be basically moving towards putting our stamp or our post in the ground and marking our space and saying, well, you have to tell us we've got to do something different, rather than, you know, we're happy with what we're doing, we're very efficient with what we're doing, it's very productive in terms of meeting the environmental objectives, in terms of waste management and keeping stuff out of landfill and recycling and all the things that we run with it, and it's working very well, and it doesn't mean running diesel trucks between here and some other place down the highway, which all of that adds up to not a very appropriate environmental footprint. So I support this for all of the reasons, not just the financial ones, and it is financially more suited to what we would need to do. If we were forced into going to other places, the travel costs alone would be massive, plus then you've got all the different levies that apply in Victoria. So I think this is to put it in the vernacular, a no-brainer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mildren. Councillor Bennett.
Two things on that theme. Officer Schultz, can you talk to us? Obviously, the state is looking into waste. Can you tell us how, how does this interact with this? So if we, pass this and then the state comes out with X, Y, Z, how will this affect this?
Councillor Bennett, I think it's fair to suggest that what Councillor Mildren has said is spot on. We're in a state of, I'm not going to call it flux because it's a little more certain than that, but the state may at any stage force our hand. I don't think we are in a position where we can wait for that to occur. We've got to continue down this particular road. And if the state changes the plan, then we'll circle back and go along with the state. At this stage, we're playing with what we know. And that is currently that we are still able to work with Albury and the 2 New South Wales and 2 other Victorian councils, but we also recognise that any contracts that we enter into will have a get out of jail clause in it if we are forced to truck our ways down the Hume to Benalla as an example.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to highlight in this report, it says that Wodonga is in the forefront of food organics and green waste. And we clarified that we are actually number 3 out of the 79 councils in Victoria. So well done to us and our residents who obviously this is something really important to them.
Thanks, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Hall.
Yeah, just to further from what Officer Schultz said, yeah, with that related decision to do with the curbside collection that we approved of with Albury Council, there is an allowed clause in that contract that if any changes to the state government so happen in regard to what Councillor Mildren has mentioned, that it is a bit of a get out of jail card, so we wouldn't be of no benefit. We wouldn't be unbenefited by it. So I believe this is the only way to go to at this stage. There will be pressure, I believe, from other councils within the North East region for us to be part of their collaborative procurement. But at this stage, due to costs, travelling, trucking costs down to other landfill sites, this is the way to go until we're told otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillors. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you very much. I agree with all the speakers before me that it's a very nice economical solution. I will be supporting this proposal, and I believe I remember we were briefed on it very thoroughly a little while ago, and did discuss this possibility that if the state tells us no, then it may need to be changed, but for the time being, we really like it. The question I have, with a potential move to 4-bin system, how would it work on and how will it be? Would it be coordinated on the other side of the border, or is it too premature and to talk about it?
Thanks, Officer Schultz.
Mr. Mayor, certainly a 4th bin will be coordinated from a Victorian side. I will take on notice any 4th bin that will be used on the New South Wales side, but the contract itself will recognise that I think it's in 2027 the purple lidded bin becomes the new colour on the block, and the contract will recognise that that service will need to be provided as and when it comes on stream. It may well be a little before that, but I think we've mandated to middle of 2027 that it should be on board.
Thank you, Director Schultz. Councillor Watson, the only one who hasn't spoken. Anything to add? No? Okay, thank you. Back to you, Councillor Mildred, in closing. No, nothing further. Thank you. Councillors, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Item 8.10, the tender for Digout and Stabilisation works. There is a recommendation for this one. Obviously, the next few tenders actually relating to our streets and roads around the Wodonga LGA. So, councillors, a recommendation on page 165, page 54 of the agenda. Thank you, John, as per the recommendation. Sorry, Councillor Watson, moving as per the recommendation. Do I have a second to Councillor Bennett? Does anybody wish to speak against? Carried unanimously. Happy with that, councillors? Thanks very much. Item 8.11, the tender for road renewal program, the minor miscellaneous works. Again, looking for a mover. Thank you, Councillor Bennett, as per the recommendation. Councillor Watson, seconder. Anybody wish to speak against? No, thank you. Item 8.12, the tender for the provision of the 2021 to 2022 Asphalt program. Looking for a mover again, as Bennett, as per recommendation. Mildred is the seconder. Anybody wish to speak against? No, thank you very much, councillors. 8.13, the tender for 2021-22 provision of the Sprayed Preservation Servicing Program. Recommendation on page 183 as per the recommendation. Bennett, seconded. Simpfendorfer, thank you very much. Anybody wishing to speak against? Gone. Carried unanimously. Item 8.14, the appointment of authorised officers. Officer recommendation on page 189 and page 78 of the public agenda. CEO, would you like to introduce this item just before councillors may move or have any questions?
Only to say that I hope it speaks for itself. It's a bit of a formality and we need those officers appointed in order to conduct their duties. Thank you.
Thank you, CEO. Councillors. Yes, question from Councillor Mildred.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Both of these staff have been with us for a while. Have they not been authorised before, or have they changed their jobs?
Councillor Mildred, you're quite right. They have been with us for a number of years. No, they haven't changed their jobs. I think that they were just never authorised. Yeah, I think it's just something we picked up quite late in the course of the last week or two, and we thought we'd try and get it formalised. Yeah.
Do I have a mover as per the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Mildred. Councillor Bennett as a seconder. Does anybody wish to speak against? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll go through our item 10s. Again, please, councillors, sing out, pull me up if you'd like me to stop on one of the particular reports. 10.1 is the planning report for July 2021 on page 197. Thank you. 10.2, the building report for July 2021. Page 200, thank you. Competitive services report at 10.3. No. 10.4, the record of councillor meetings on page 208. No. The 10.5, decisions register. Councillors, no, thank you. Item 11, notices of... Sorry, I had somebody pull me up there somewhere for 10.5. Sorry, was it Councillor Mildred?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like a really quick update on what's happening with the Jacob Group of Companies resolution, which is on page 215, if that was possible. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, from recollection, Councillor Simpfendorfer has picked up on something correct here. We're here of conflict of interest on that particular matter. But I do believe, Councillor Simpfendorfer, were you the only one at that council meeting with the conflict of interest on this item? Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll wait for you to leave and then we'll get the response out of the CEO. Thank you.
It'll be a very quick response from me. That project is still at the sort of scoping stage. Obviously, our planners have been extremely busy, and this is one of those projects that thankfully the council has agreed to fund, and therefore it's one of those that we're actually putting out to contract to do this planning for us. Officer Schultz, did you want to add any more to that effect?
Councillor Mildred, we're finalising the scope at the moment. And we are probably going to get out to tender, calling for quotations in the next, I would like to say the next 3 or 4 weeks, with a clear intention of completing those works midway through the last quarter of the financial year.
Thank you, Director Schultz and CEO, and we're just going to get Councillor Simpfendorfer back in the room. Thanks, Councillor Simpfendorfer. Good memory. Rapid draw, I like it. Item 11, notices of motion, of which I don't believe there are any this month. Item 12, items of petition, of which there are also none, CEO. Item 13, the council common seal, of which there's none. General business at item 14. Councillor Bennett, thank you.
Just 2 quick comments from me. I just wanted to thank a member of the Wodonga Historical Society, Uta Wiltshire, who has been involved in the group since 2001, and then soon after that she became secretary, and soon after that she became treasurer. And she's done a phenomenal job in the Wodonga Historical Society, and she's wrapping up her role to pass that on to someone else. So I just wanted to acknowledge all the work that she has done. I first met her when I was a student studying history, and she helped me with various things. I had no idea what I was doing, and she was such an amazing help to me, and she's been such an amazing help to so many people in our community. So thank you for all your work with the Wodonga Historical Society. And secondly, just wanted to note that last week the IPCC report came out. So that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And so that is a international body of leading climate scientists who every 5 to 8 years put out a report that talks about the current state of the climate. And in this report, they have said that the level of CO2 is more than it's ever been for the past 2 million years. So it's unequivocal that human interference has caused this. Now, these leading experts who've studied this their whole life, I'll take their word on that. So I note in one of the meetings that I was not at, we had the Sustainable Wodonga come up, and I think, am I right in saying that that is coming up again? And the aim I'm looking for is, clearly this report says net zero emissions by 2050 is far too late. And that's what our council is still, has said is our target. So I've seen other councils like comparable to ours, Ballarat, Bendigo, Geelong, have better targets in place. Even Alpine, down the road, has a goal of 2023 for all council operations to be net zero emissions. So just thanking all the community members that have got in contact with me about that report, and hopefully let's watch this space and see when Sustainable Wodonga comes back up that maybe we can follow all that evidence of literally world-leading scientists and improve our net emission target.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. General business, Councillor Simpfendorfer, no. Councillor Quilty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just quickly would like to acknowledge the efforts of Councillor Watson to make sure that at this difficult time he made it possible to be virtually here with us tonight, and I would like to wish Councillor Watson a speedy recovery.
Thank you, Councillor Quilty. And we just got the royal wave from Councillor Watson. You got some general business, Councillor Watson, or that's what you're putting your hand up for? Okay, no worries, gotcha.
Mr. Mayor, yes, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Quilty, for your very kind words. And I am improving very well, and I should be back in Wodonga on Friday. But I've had time for a little bit of reflection. Give me 20 seconds, Mr. Mayor. But I think with COVID-19 and with the very stressful times now cross-border, across our country, please, everyone, look out for your neighbours, look out for your family, look out for your friends. Make a call, pick up the phone and ring someone each day just to check on them, because I think we are going into some pretty hard times with this lockdown and with the country where it is at the moment. So, Mr. Mayor, let's all look out for each other.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Good sentiment. Councillor Mildren or Councillor Hall, did either of you have any general business? No, that's okay. I know we've celebrated Hyphen a couple of times this evening. If I can just chime in there and add, it was a great pleasure to have a couple of the councillors that could make it on Friday there for the official opening, although be at a little lower key than we'd like to celebrate some of our buildings and particularly milestones as a city. But I just want to reflect on and congratulate the councillor group from before this current one. Also the councillor group prior to that with the transformation of the city of Wodonga, but particularly with our council officers who collaboratively have brought a wonderful building out of the ground, and to have Jacqueline Symes, the member for Northern Victoria, standing beside me, and to quote what she said in private, but I think we should wear it as a badge of pride as a city. She said, "We need to get other Victorian cities here to see what you can deliver for the price tag." She was absolutely bamboozled by the quality of work that was delivered. So kudos to the contractors and everybody who worked on the project publicly. But to think that Wodonga as a city could lead the way for a state of Victoria to show you what efficient use of money and how we can deliver such a significant project for our community is, to have that going back into the halls of Parliament, that we're setting a good example of efficiency, was a pretty proud moment for me as the mayor of the city, which ultimately was delivering a project that I haven't really had too much to do with, but have inherited. So thank you to the councillor groups before this current one, but also to the executive that have delivered wonderfully on that project for the city, regardless of any ups and downs along the way. So thank you. We'll move on to item 15, urgent business, of which I don't believe there's any. Item 16, question time. CEO, do we have any questions? No. Item 17 is confidential business. So recommendation on page 227, 112 of the public agenda that the meeting be closed to public. So councillors, do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Hall. Nobody wishes to speak against. Thank you. We'll close the meeting. Thanks. All right, councillors, a recommendation on page 250 of your agenda, page 116 of the public agenda. I move that the in-camera recommendations are adopted. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Hall, seconder. Anyone wish to speak against? Carried unanimously. And councillors, without any further business, that's the meeting closed for this evening at 8:24 p.m. Thank you.